big men, you tall men can get your clothes at famous Robert Hall, low overhead cash prices.
Now at last, you big men, you tall men can get quality tailored suits.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for a special broadcast. Let's go without delay to Julian in Studio 14B here at Near Future Laboratory Global Headquarters. Julian?
Thanks, Chester. Check this out. I was rifling through an old hard drive and I found this video. It seems to date to November of 2011, over 13 years ago. It's Liam Young, Matt Jones, Kevin Slavin, and Bruce Sterling and myself in a salon-like conversation that was part of, I think, a series of discussions that Liam organized at the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London. If memory serves, I found myself in London as part of some Nokia thingamabob, and I think Matt heard that I was there and reached out to ask if I'd participate. So here it is, both in shitty 2011 640 by 360 video that I up-resed, and audio that I'll put on the podcast if you just want to listen to what we were talking about 13 years ago. So before I get started, I want to let you know that I do these kinds of things because I feel this is something that's better to have in the world than sitting in a hard drive that will die someday, as must we all. And it helps immensely if you can help support that and help us find the way to keep doing these kinds of things here at Near Future Laboratory by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/nearfuturelaboratory. This is really made possible by all those people over there who right now are contributing to help me keep the thing going, keep the studio operating, keep all the servers on, all those kinds of things. I'll also say that the material I talk about here, again 13 years ago, can trace a very clear and bright line to our book, The Manual of Design Fiction, which is still available over at shop.nearfuturelaboratory.com. Now, when you buy your copy of the manual, you're supporting a truly independent creative and intellectual studio practice. Everything that happens here is done with fierce independence. I'm the publisher, the store manager, the blogger, the community manager, the podcaster, the back office assistant, social media management, and I'll tell you, it's a lot of work, and I wouldn't have it any other way. One of the greatest lessons I got from my granddaddy, who was poor in the pocket but rich in his heart and soul, built his house, raised a family, farmed tobacco as a black man in the rural mountains of Virginia, was when he said, "Whatever you do, make sure you own it." I don't know and can only imagine how that sensibility was learned, probably through hardship. This is why I keep Near Future Laboratory protected this way. Plus, I love making things and can't think of many good reasons to not do things independently and do them with other truly independent partners. Okay, I hear Matt coming to the microphone to introduce the Curious Salon Thrilling Wonder Stories. Let's listen in.
Okay, we're going to reconvene. From the organic and the imperfect and the articulate and the kind of accidental to pure platonic thought. Expressed like pink laser beams from the low orbit of the Earth, including on my left. It sort of looks like it's going to be like a chess battle or something, or battleships or something. I don't know. Yeah, I quite like it.
Dueling presentations.
Yeah. So we're in the final stretch of our kind of strange wedding / zoo radio format. Interrogation of dead animals, robots, time zones, film directors, Captain America and Bruce Sterling, who may be the same person.
I missed Captain America.
You missed Captain America. And somebody who's certainly not Captain America, more like the Amazing Spider-Man. First of all, we're going to have Julian Bleeker. Take it away. Julian.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. So I'm just going to do a little presentation that I think maybe synthesizes some of the discussion that's been going on here and in and about, and my sort of insight and sort of perspective on the special effect. And one thing that occurred to me in the last couple of presentations that was quite interesting was that there was this little bit of sort of pause or disclaimer to say that some of the stuff I'm showing you isn't real. This is just a video, it's a fake video, or this isn't ready for market yet. And I think it's an interesting observation to think that, just to say that when those sort of moments happen, we're sort of really giving into the effects of the market, of capitalism, to say that something isn't real unless it's able to be marketed and sold, or if someone hasn't tooled up a factory in China to make the thing, then it's not quite real. And of course, if we expand beyond that sense of what can be real and what can happen, we enter into this other realm that I'm referring to as the special effect. And it's the thing that makes us think that something is possible, that it could happen. And I think in those videos that where you see it's like just a demonstration, or it's a corporate vision of the future, but it's not quite here, but it will be. We just want to let you know so that our share price goes up, because your share price is based on the ability to generate profits in the future. That we need to expand beyond that, and then we shouldn't have to pause to say this isn't real. Because in very many ways, of course, those things are, because they're activating our imaginations, they're making us think about what could be. And to say that the thing that is real is only the thing that can be actually marketed and sold and productized and made on a mass scale is complete bullshit. And I know that because I got a fucking degree. This degree was conferred upon me by the University of California. It's a doctor of philosophy in the history of consciousness, and it was signed by Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was not only a governor, but he was the Terminator. And the Terminator is important for my work because I was writing about special effects in film. And the joke amongst the Bleecker family is that I had to wait. It took me 10 years to get it, and I tell them, like, well, I was waiting for Arnold to actually win the governorship so he could sign it. This is what I wrote about. I wrote about the reality effect of technoscience. And this was an effect that I sort of observed and wanted to consider, to think about what are the ways in which technology and science make us believe in what could be? What are the ways in which this reality effect translates an idea or a speculation into something that is as real as this table? What is the material effects that these essentially speculations have on making things possible? And there was a lot of interesting ways to look at this. One of the things I looked at was visualization technology. So the telescope was very interesting to me, because this is this way of sort of seeing out there, seeing things that were sort of beyond the horizon in a way. I was also very interested in the ways in which video games translate our sort of imagination into things that could be real. One thing that, for the purposes here, that I looked at that's relevant is the special effect. So how is it that in film we're able to sort of suspend our disbelief long enough to believe what we see on the screen? And so we believe that there's this thing called the Terminator. And we do that because we want to enjoy the film, because we paid, I don't know, now it's like $14 in the US. So I better get my money's worth, so I'm just going to allow myself to kind of immerse into the narrative and accept what's going on the screen. And in that way, our sort of imagination is activated. We see the content of this story, and we sort of allow ourselves to open up and believe what's there. And I think that's quite an interesting thing from a lot of different perspectives, but in particular from the perspective of just expanding the realm of possibility and allowing ourselves not to be as skeptical as to what could happen, because there are a lot of reasons why we want to not be skeptical. There was, so just to get into this, a little bit of the work and sort of the prehistory of the special effect, I think appears in this book called Leviathan and the Air Pump, written by this amazing historian of science, Stephen Chapin, and his colleague Simon Schaefer. And they were looking at the ways in which, in this particular point in the history of science, Hobbes and Boyle looking at the possibility for the existence of a vacuum, which at the time was a very dangerous topic, because the idea that there could be a space where nothing existed went up against all kinds of doctrine, not the least of which was the church, which didn't want there to be a place where there's nothing, because it meant that God wasn't there, and that's heresy, and they hang you up by your Buster Browns and do bad things to you. Robert Boyle's air pump was sort of at the center of this, and just maybe half a kilometer from here, this painting actually hangs. It was called "Experiment with a Bird in the Air Pump" by Joseph Ryder Darby. So anyone from Darby, you've got a place in the history of science. in this painting, which is absolutely beautiful. It's worth just sort of sitting and gazing at the National Galleries. A sort of roving bringer of great ideas from the capitals of the world is usually hired by a family with some money to come and sort of basically educate the family and the children in particular about the wonders of the world. So these guys, so it's the character who's looking like, he's looking, I don't know, like a Pete Townsend, aged Pete Townsend kind of guy. He's just marveling at the science that's going on. There's this wonderful kind of tableau here where you have on the left, you have the young lovers who are sort of not so much interested in what's going on with the experiment, more interested in each other. You have the young boy just to their right, just a little bit more to the left, who's gazing at this bird who's in this glass vessel, and so the air is being evacuated from the vessel, and so the bird is kind of like not really flying around much. It's probably flopping, and the story goes that, just as the bird's ready to expire, of course, they let the air back in so the bird can live. You have to imagine that there were some mishaps along with this. And you have the younger fellow who's maybe thinking about going into the realm of science or medicine, is just sort of taking in what's going on. You have the older gentleman, maybe the patriarch of the family, who is just pondering how the world has changed so much since he was a little boy and all these great wonders that are going on. Of course, you have the father sort of consoling the daughter who is more concerned about the fate of the bird. And sort of what's going on here as a tableau in the history of science and the sort of the exhibition of new ideas is this sort of very mechanical act. And that mechanical act is, of course, the air pump, which, as much as that glass vessel there, was big science. So we would take for granted now an air pump because we all have bicycles and we take our car to, we pump up the air and this kind of thing. It was exceptionally difficult to create a device that could evacuate air from a vessel. It was the kind of thing where it was the X Prize of its day. And the same thing with the manufacture of that glass vessel, to get a glass vessel that could retain its integrity even under negative pressure and that could be carried around and this kind of thing. This was, this guy's equivalent of, the most precious apparatus that he could have to help demonstrate and, make his way and have his living. There's another illustration in the book that I found particularly fascinating. So this was the experimental theater, and it was quite important that it was seen as a theater because the only way in which these ideas were shared and sort of transmitted to other people was that you had to do these demonstrations. So this was effectively the kind of publishing technology of the day, where you had to create these apparatuses in which other people could come and see the science and thereby sort of spread the knowledge and sort of wonder about it and speculate about it and, of course, engage in conversation about it. And there weren't very many of these things. And one of the reasons why there weren't very many of these things is every little bit of that apparatus is handmade. It's all made by craftsmen. So you had to find the best craftsmen to make the glass vessel. And I don't know, maybe they're coming from Venice. You have to have the people, all the leathersmiths who could make all the fittings and couplings so that they'd be airtight. This stuff was very important, and in this theater, what people would see is basically this stage here, and Boyle would sort of come out, and it was a very sort of theatrical event by all records. What you didn't see were these special effects artisans, as I refer to them, underneath, who were actually doing the very laborious work of making fact. They were doing this physical activity that materialized an idea that was exhibited above the stage, and these were he-men. So these weren't just like any old stage Joe. They had to be found people who could, once, of course, you start evacuating a chamber, initially it's quite easy to move the air out, but very quickly it becomes almost impossible. So these big brawlers would have to be brought in to essentially do the pump work. And there was something in that activity, the fact that it was such a physical act, and it wasn't just ideas being sort of shared and distributed and discussed, that there was this other thing going on, that there was this material activity that was happening that I think is quite important to keep in mind, and something that, in my mind, translates very quickly to the work that happens by special effects artisans today. So anyone doing special effects, no, it's not just click a button and the thing happens, especially in a world where you sort of, I imagine, competing for the next greatest effect, you might have to write special software that doesn't exist. It's not just Adobe After Effects. You might have to come up with new techniques, and those techniques are usually kept quite secret until after the film is produced, when there's a lot of behind the scenes, how was it made, and precisely this kind of activity is sort of revealed. And so that relationship between the creation of something that looks real and the material activity that's happening underneath the stage, and the creation of something that looks real in the theater of film and all the work that goes on underneath it is the parallel that I think makes it impossible to distinguish between something that is where we feel forced to apologize that it's not real, because it is real, because it starts conversations, because it gets people thinking about what could be, despite the fact that you can't just go to the corner store and buy it. So what I want to share with you in the last 5 minutes or so are 3 examples that use a kind of special effect that reveal ways in which the thing where you might want to apologize for but you shouldn't is happening. So these are examples where I think there is design work going on, there is proper engineering work going on. It's not just adornment to something. There are ways in which in these films people are speculating about and provoking conversations about some aspect of the future that is not something that we should just shrug at and walk away from and say like, wow, it's good entertainment. It is actually changing the way we think about the world. Sorry, there'll be 2 examples of film and one from a book. So the first one is one of my favorites, and it's my favorite in yours. It's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was made in 1968. Of course, collaboration between Stanley Kubrick, Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote the novel that this was based on, and then most importantly, I think various rocket scientists who were involved in the creation of the film. And I picked this little loop in particular because of the special effect that was, correct me if I'm wrong, I hope I'm not, I'm pretty sure it was Douglas Trumbull, young Douglas Trumbull, who was working in special effects in the film, was I guess charged with creating these sort of ancillary graphics, which now we see all the time even in a Jason Bourne thriller. Like there need to be screens popping and bleeping and showing things happening. What I find most fascinating here is that Douglas Trumbull, in collaboration with various scientists, we're trying to figure out, we're basically showing what screens would look like in deep space travel, before deep space travel ever happened, and before there was any such thing as a graphical user interface. And I just find it absolutely mind-blowing that these people could come together and say like, well, this is probably what it should look like. And it holds up, I think, even today, that before the Macintosh, before Adobe Flash, before squiggle art graphics and those kinds of things, these guys were actually doing it. And they're doing it with quite manual technology. So there were no computers to show the computer. They were just doing it all with hand animation and rear projection. It's very exciting to me. And the fact that it was 1968, for crying out loud. We hadn't even gone to the moon yet. And then even things like this, like speculating, imagining, showing us what FaceTime would be many decades before FaceTime even existed. And this is always a sort of favorite example, the zero gravity toilet. So there's a lot of very interesting sort of ancillary, the making of and speculating about. And so that text is actual text, it's not Greek text. So they actually went through, Stanley Kubrick being Stanley Kubrick and not wanting to leave anything out, said like, okay, we'll sort it out. How would you deal with a zero gravity toilet? And we'll put that in as the graphic, which you can't read there, but if you get the making of documentation, they actually have it written. And then, of course, the more recent example from this is one of the movie posters. Samsung lawyers with straight face used this as a defense against Apple to say, like, look, there's prior art for the iPad. And I just find it wonderful that so we apologize, it's not real, but that these lawyers, who I got to imagine are making a lot of money, went in straight face and said it was real. And so we didn't rip off Apple. Apple ripped off Stanley Kubrick, sorry to say. So another example, I love these Haynes manuals. So anyone who has had a car, when they were younger than 22, probably had one of these to help repair it. And they've just done this wonderful thing where they shift that idiom of the service manual and make it just plain as day. You have an Enterprise. And that warp core has just gone a little bit fuzzy. Here's the manual to help repair it. And it's just a wonderful point of entry that engages in, so it's fan fiction effectively, but it allows people to engage in the Star Trek universe by putting this sort of facade on it. It almost makes it more interesting in a way. It's like, oh yeah, I got one of these, and this just sits on the shelf next to the one for the old VW van and all that kind of stuff. Of course, they had to make one for Apollo 11. Same idea. Now, the third example, I feel a little bit funny about sharing this because it's sort of pre-release stuff. It's fine to show. This is it'll be the first production from the Near Future Laboratories Moving Pictures Division. It's a film called Hal. This is just a production clip from it. In this film, what we're doing is we're exploring the ways in which artificial intelligences are becoming more kind of human. In this film, what we're doing is there's a character, Hal. He happens to be the other member of the crew that they refer to quite often. And I thought that it would be a wonderful way to sort of probe our relationship to machines now, especially with things like Siri, so that we have these conversations with things, and we sort of want to wonder and speculate about how they might relate to us. And it's a little bit troubling that we're sort of taking it for granted. And so part of this is sort of saying, like, look, these are machines. Maybe they should be, maybe they shouldn't have the same sort of conversational tone. What would they do if they start overhearing us say things like, well, we're gonna return the iPhone because it's not working properly. Like, what are the ways in which they might respond or might turn back on us, or might fight against us, or might lock the bathroom door on us and won't let us out because they're not able to do that. So this will be coming out in 2012. You heard it here first. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. And now, Kevin Slavin, man of many parts, some of which work better than others.
They all work.
Game designer, writer, teacher, prognosticator, man of the world, etc. Special effect artisan, perhaps, and not terribly good at his own AV requirements.
All right. Hold on now. You know what? This is my favorite part of every presentation.
You would have loved it earlier today then, man.
1024-768, please.
Oh, that's the least of it.
Oh.
Now what? Right? Isn't this your favorite part? Okay. Now I have control over here. All right. I could tell a joke.
There's actually a magic button in
Can't.
Keynote to do that.
Is there really?
Yeah.
It's going to be flipped, right? It's going to be. Yep, it's totally flipped.
Oh, there's magic buttons there.
Really?
Yeah, press play.
No, that's not the problem.
Kevin's an expert on the way that computers are changing our relationship to physical space and each other. And this is a performance piece that brings that out.
You guys want to see it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're going to.
You are. All right, let's see. Yeah.
Hey.
I'll take it.
All right.
Okay. Okay, so this is Core War. Can you guys hear me okay?
You have to get quite close to the mic.
Check. Okay, yeah. So this is Core War. This is a video game from 1984. Did anybody ever play this? Has anyone ever played this? It continues to be available commercially. It's oh wait, it's how do I get it to play? I wonder. Wow, this is really not my. There we go. Okay, so Core War. It is a game by programmers for programmers, and to play it, you write an algorithm. It's a two-player game, and then you unleash it against the other player's algorithm. And in the end, only one of them wins. This is Dwarf Scout versus Little Factory. And I don't know if you saw what Little Factory did there, but it was an awesome move, and it won. This is not. It's not a popular game. There's really nothing to do in it except write an algorithm and watch it win or lose, and that's totally abstract, right? So, let's see. This is a photograph by an artist named Michael Najjar, and it's real, not in the Julian sense of real, but I mean like real, like it's real. Like this is like he actually went there to Patagonia to take this photograph, but then he also worked on it extensively in Photoshop, presumably, to map the contours of the mountains there to the vicissitudes of the Dow Jones Index. So what you see there, that the high precipice and then that big valley there, that's the 2008 financial crisis. So this photograph was made right around 2009 when we were kind of deep in the valley, and I'm not sure exactly where it is that we are now. He did that with the Dow Jones. This is the RTS, that's Russia. Here's the Hang Seng Index, that's Hong Kong. Similar topography, mysteriously. And this is art, right? I mean, this is, it's metaphor. But it's a metaphor with teeth. And it's with those teeth that I want to sort of talk about this idea of contemporary math and like sort of specifically algorithmic operations as sort of something that are no longer derived from the world around us, but rather kind of imposed on it. That rather than sort of being pulled out of the world, that they're somehow shaping it. The world's, around us and inside us, and that over time they take like the texture of truth, that they kind of ossify and calcify with repetition, like the ground beneath our feet. This is, if you go actually further down, like under the earth, this is in Texas, Waxahachie, which is, I just never believe that that's a real name for a real place, but I think it is. And if you go deep underground near Waxahachie in Texas, you'll find traced through the rock, although kind of abandoned, it's not a mine and it's not political territory, that's the Desertron. And I learned about this, of all places, from Robert Harris, which is a long story. But if the Desertron had been completed, this was America's answer to the Large Hadron Collider, which was a question that hadn't been fully asked yet, which was abandoned. The entire project was abandoned. This is what it looked like on the ground. It's real, it's abandoned. And this, the Desertron Super Collider, was sort of where America was working on making math real. And this is where they made it real sort of at the same time that it disappeared. It was abandoned in 2003 after going like $8 billion into projected overrun. And this is where the American physicists were in their own kind of race to zero, trying to beat the speed of light. And you'll note, as architects, not a lot of human affordances in the architecture here, not a lot of house paint or window dressing, because all the action is really underground, or it would have been underground if they'd finished it. So this is a 54-mile ring, a tunnel actually blasting through the United States, all to sort of study the matter underneath everything, subatomic particles, nature of the universe, stuff that I know nothing about really. And Clinton was worried when it was voted to be canceled. The president was worried about the economic effects on Texas of canceling the Desertron project. And the thing that he couldn't have predicted, or he didn't predict, or nobody really predicted, was what the larger economic effects of canceling the Desertron project were. Because what it really did was it took the densest concentration at that moment of American physicists and turned it into a kind of diaspora. A bunch of physicists looking for something to do, some difficult problem to solve. And so they found it. They found it much closer to home, much closer to my home, the financial district here in New York City, which used to be built on information and the people who moved that information around. It used to be based on kind of like flesh and blood, which is why you had to build these buildings there to do that. Really, there is this real correlation, if not causality, between that moment where that huge tunnel under the earth gets abandoned and when something else starts to hollow out over on Manhattan Island. And when I go down, like when I look at the Occupy Wall Street guys who are actually about 3 blocks from right here, I think of like hermit crabs, of like taking the shell from something that actually died quite a while ago, and using that for a home. And it actually, that the occupation has more to do with the way hermit crabs occupy than actual displacement. Because there's really not that many people left down there. And that wasn't sudden. It wasn't immediate. It was sort of slow and subtle. And I only learned about it years later at cruising altitude. I was on a transatlantic flight next to a Hungarian physicist who was about my age. And I was talking to him, and what I was curious about was what a Hungarian physicist did during the Cold War. And sort of, in talking about it, he said, well, I worked on stealth. And I thought that was kind of interesting because it's not what they're famous for. And I said, so you were making stealth? And he said, no, we were breaking stealth. And he said, you'd have to know a lot about how stealth works to understand that. And I said, yeah, well, I kind of do. I know more than some, because I used to work on the F-22 fighter bomber account when I worked in advertising, speaking of ethics. So this is what I know, and I'm going to explain this super quickly, right? Which is that, of course, you can't just pass a radar signal through 52 tons of metal. You can't just make the thing disappear. So if you want to take this huge thing and you want to make it seem to disappear, what you can do is if you can figure out a way, a strategy, to take the big thing and sort of make it look like a million little things, like a flock of birds. You're only going to see this video like 5 more times tonight, by the way. If you can make the big thing look like a million little things, like something that has like the resolution of birds or maybe pollen or something, well, then you'd have to calibrate radar to be able to detect every bird in the sky, every piece of pollen. And if you're a radar, that's a really shitty job, right? That's a really difficult thing to do, and you don't want to do that. And so this is one of the fundamental sort of premises of stealth, and I said, so that's as I understood it. We're having this conversation on a 747, and he said, yeah, but that's only if you're a radar. He said that's only if you're looking for a radar signal. He said we looked for electrical signals. We looked for electrical signals that were just moving through the sky, and he said, and in Hungary, if we saw electrical signals moving through the sky with no radar signature, we thought that probably has something to do with the Americans, and it usually did. And he said, so we made a black box to sort of look for those electrical signals as they moved through the sky, and that's how we sort of broke stealth long before the F-117 was shot down over Serbia by chance. And I said, so that's like an interesting career, right? Like, because you've basically negated 60 years of aeronautic research, and where do you go from there? Like, what's your act 2? Like, what's the next phase in your career? And he said, well, financial services. And I was like, well, that's interesting because those are in the news really frequently lately. And I said, so what are physicists doing down in financial services? What's the black box of the financial services industries? And he said, actually, it's funny that you asked that because it's actually called black box trading, what he's working on. Just a coincidence. It's called black box trading. It's another name for something that's called, more commonly, algo trading, algorithmic trading. And that comes from institutional traders, mutual funds, big banks, having some of the very same problems as the United States Air Force. Which you can make some joke about crashing, but I'll let it go. But if you are a large institutional trader, right? Let's say you're going to move like 1 million shares of Microsoft or whatever, right? You're going to move 1 million shares through the market, right? And this has to do with the size of the positions that they're taking. He says, okay, so if you're going to move 1 million shares, you can't just enter into the market and say, I'm going to buy or I'm going to sell 1 million shares, because it's a little bit like, imagine playing poker and, nobody's looked at their cards yet, nobody knows what they have, and you just stand up and go like, I'm all in. And it's like, okay, well, nobody even knows how to play, right? It disrupts the very circumstances that you're sort of seeking to take advantage of. So they can't just put 1 million shares to buy or sell out in the market. So they engage in what Jeff Manaugh called financial camouflage. And they basically use algorithms to break up those 1 million shares into seemingly random chunks of buys and sells that are seemingly randomly distributed through the market. And that's all well and good, and it actually worked for a while, except that, of course, the very same math that you use to hide something mathematically in the market is the very same math that anybody else can use to find it. So that's really what's going on in the market, right? If you need to picture, what is happening, with 70% of the trading that's happening in the operating system, formerly known as your pension or your mortgage, what you can picture is a series of algorithms that are in competition, some of which are trying to hide from everything, and some of which are trying to find those algorithms that are hiding. And what could go wrong with such a scheme, really? The flash crash of 245, which is my favorite name for the event that happened about a year ago, in which the entire American stock market lost 9% of its value in about 5 minutes. So 9%, stock market just disappears, 70% of that being just bought, sold, moved around by a bunch of algorithms that no one in particular has written, that nobody in particular has any oversight of, nobody in particular has any idea what happened. And in fact, collectively, nobody can even agree on what happened in the flash crash, because there's no human agency left anymore to interrogate. All that a trader has at this point is just a big monitor with a number moving up and down and a red button that says stop. And what we're doing sort of collectively and collaboratively is sort of writing something that we can't read. We're sort of writing something illegible. We humans have written something that we can't really read anymore at all, almost, because there are still a few superheroes in the world. Some of them statistically have to be in Boston. So these guys are called nanics, and they are using, I don't know what, math, I suppose, and they actually they interrogate the market data, and they can find some of the algorithms. Like, they're basically kind of reverse engineering the algorithms out of the market, the same way all the financial guys are. And when they find one, they pull it out and they pin it to the wall like a butterfly, or like a constellation, right? Like the way that we used to tell ourselves stories about the stars, or I guess we still do. And they're fiction, but they did let us navigate home pretty effectively for a pretty long time. They were stories that we told ourselves to kind of make sense out of a world that didn't make any sense. And that's what Nanex is doing with the market. They're making the thing that humans use, which are stories. So they reach in, and this is one that they found a while ago. This one is called The Knife. It's the Carnival. That's the Boston Shuffler. The Castle Wall. Twilight. And then, you look back at Core War, at Dwarf Scout, and Little Factory, and you realize that, if chess was an allegory for war and Monopoly is some weird twisted allegory for capitalism, then Core War from 1984, it's kind of a masterpiece, right? Because there's nothing abstract about it, right? It's not an allegory at all. It's an audition, right? It's an audition for 25 years later, when the war, the Dwarf Scout and Little Factory, becomes real, with a couple $1 billion on the line. And if you picture the New York Stock Exchange, picture Dwarf Scout and Little Factory, and picture the Carnival and the Knife. And the gag is, the thing that I came to understand as I came to understand all of this, is that, of course, the knife and the Boston Shuffler, they're not just working their way through financial markets, and that this isn't really a financial services story, that it's actually much bigger than money. So to sort of like, when you start to understand this as kind of the physics underneath us, you can find it almost anywhere you look. This is a book about flies, secondhand. This is about the genetics of flies. So this is for sale on Amazon. About 6 months ago, the asking price was $1.7 million, which seems high, but would have been a bargain had you acted on that, because it was 4 hours later, it was $23.6 million. And what you see here is two book traders, small-time book traders, using effectively, Dwarf Scout, Little Factory, the knife, etc., using fundamental algorithms to try to set the price of their books in the Amazon book market. And what you see here are two algorithms that have caught themselves in a loop. Two algorithms that each one of them themselves is engaging in an extremely rational behavior, but tied together are asking $23.6 million for a book about flies. And the only difference between what you see here and what you see in the stock market is that on Amazon, it still has a human to say, like, yeah, all right, I'll take it, right? That's the only difference, And as with Amazon, so with Netflix, so this is an algorithm called pragmatic chaos. So I don't know what the numbers are here in the United States. It's 20 million people are using Netflix to watch their movies. 60% of what they're watching is determined by the recommendations of a single algorithm called pragmatic chaos that is fundamentally, in its own way, determining the taste of 20 million of the 300 millions in America. And the question is, if that's, if you can build algorithms to sort of recommend the movies, could you also build algorithms to make them? And the answer is, of course, yes. Of course you can do that. This is a bunch of UK financial services guys who took the wisdom that they had gathered from working in financial services for many years and decided to apply it to Hollywood. They have narrative algos that they can use to process your script and tell you whether that is a $30 million, $50 million, or $250 million movie before it's made. And the question is, if these algorithms crashed, how would you know? What would be the evidence of that, except more shitty movies? And the question is that if you have algorithms that are producing culture, and if you have algorithms to regulate and recommend their consumption, who is the user up in here? I'll skip over a bunch of things about grapes and wine and Robert Parker, we got to get to robots. So, because if you really want to look for all this, if it all seems abstract, you can find them in at least a lot of American households. You'll find them in your house. These are the time-lapse photographs that were made of two competing cleaning robots that sort of, you can see, have very different ideas about what clean is, and that there's sort of these weird sort of secret architects with different ideas about your bedroom. And the question is, how could robots have such different ideas, and what informed those ideas? And the answer is kind of like a shrug, like, I don't really know. Because a lot of the algorithms that are being used in all of this are genetic algorithms, and we could talk for a long time, and probably you guys know much more about that actually than I do. This is an excellent visualization of how they work, right? This is a genetic algorithm that is just sort of given a few parameters, just use a couple wheels and some weight and try to get from A to B. And you watch this for a while, and I've watched this for hours on end because I think it's just some of the most amazing entertainment produced by computers. Because you feel, it's like watching a puppy in the snow, right? It's like you're like, just put the wheels on the bottom, and it seems pretty straightforward. And you can watch this for a while, But you let this go, and it learns actually, of course, a lot quicker than a baby learns, and it just keeps mutating until it finds it, and then it sort of reaches, a relatively optimal state very quickly. That's probably about an hour in this particular case, and it's sort of delicious and it's sort of scary, and not because it's smart, but because it seems smart without any underlying sensibility that we would recognize as human. And I've been thinking a lot about this particular point lately, and it's helped me to think about sort of what's useful about stories and storytelling. And I've been reading this book by James Glick called The Information, and sort of thinking about stories as information with a lossy form of compression to help information travel. And the lossiness, sort of explains the futility of demanding that stories be true. And then you look at something like this, and you realize that what's unsettling about watching an algorithm arrive at something like this is that you miss that sense that there is an author somewhere, right? That what a story is basically just information with an author. And that what we're looking at here, and what we're looking at in cleaning robots and the entire stock market is the sense of living in a world without one, without an author, without authorship. I don't want to be alarmist, but that's who's in your house, right? It manifests itself in a lot of different ways. This is destination control elevators. I was just on one in Salford a couple hours ago. You guys must know all about this stuff, right? It's, destination control elevators. And instead of this, mess of just like having everybody decide what car to get into and decide what floor they want to go to, you input that on the outside, and then it's a bin packing algorithm, right? You just sort of sort humans into different cans, and so there's two problems. One, which I just saw in Salford, is that then you need elevator customer support, right? So now you have a person who stands there who explains to everybody how to use this thing that they've been using for about 50 years without a huge amount of effort. But the more important problem, and the reason that these aren't really being used very much anymore, is because they produce panic when people get in them. Because people get in them, and you can see the problem right away, that there's no sort of human affordances left over there in the left. There's nothing like a button. There's nothing like anything to suggest that there's any sense of control at all. There's just a window with a number that moves up and down, and a red button that says stop. Right? And we're optimizing, right? We're optimizing all of this to a kind of machine dialect that barely speaks human at all. And it's the scale of the thing that makes it crazy, right? And you can go back to Wall Street to really find the madness of the scale, because this is where it gets the teeth all the way in. Because if you are an algo trader, right? If you are the Hungarian physicist, right? If you are running algorithms like Cherokee Nation, Bluegrass, Marco Polo, et cetera, down there where Occupy Wall Street is, you need to be faster than you can possibly imagine. You need to be faster than any human scale, right? It takes 500,000 microseconds to click a mouse, right? But if you're a Wall Street algorithm like Frog Pond, if you're 5 microseconds behind, you're a loser. Right? So if you were an algorithm, you would hire an architect, like a friend of mine, who was hollowing out a skyscraper in Frankfurt, right? Who was removing all the furniture, all the everything, and just laying down steel to hold up server racks, because the building was never meant to support the weight of the machines that were displacing the people who'd been in there. And all of that for a specific reason, which was so that one algorithm, or maybe a few algorithms, could get closer to the internet. Because we think of the internet as a distributed system, and of course it is a distributed system, but it's distributed from places. In Manhattan, it's distributed from 60 Broad Street there. And the type of building is called a carrier hotel. And this is really where the pipes come right up. They come out of Staunton Sands here in the UK. So that's kind of the mother lode for the internet itself. And the problem being that if your algorithm, if Frog Pond is whatever that is, about 20 blocks away, that's something like 4 milliseconds for that information to travel through the earth up to the carrier hotel. And if you are 4 milliseconds behind, you might as well not be trading at all. So you need to be right on top of it, right? So the real, like the very clever algorithms, Twilight, the Carnival, Boston Shuffler, etc., are actually taking over the buildings that are closest to the carrier hotels. And when you start to really understand that this is how urban planning is ad hoc being pursued, you realize that network topology has become the new urban topography. You know, when real estate valuations are being determined not by the proximity to a school or a subway or like a good bar scene, but by the race to zero, right? By proximity to the pipe. And that algorithms have their own neighborhoods at this point, built on this sort of new natural resource. Because, you know, pound for pound and inch for inch and dollar for dollar, there's nobody in this room who could squeeze revenue out of a building like the Boston Shuffler can. So let's, if you zoom out a little bit further, we're almost all the way out. If you zoom out just a little bit further, you can see that the scale is even bigger than that. What we're looking at here is an 825-mile trench in a straight line between New York City and Chicago. This is actually finished construction now. This is built by a company called Spread Networks. Jim Barksdale, first he did Netscape. This is what he does now. Thanks, Jim. This is a pipe laid down through the United States, a tunnel built through rock and mountain, all so that the algorithms moving between New York and Chicago can trade 37 times faster than a mouse click, all just to run the carnival and the knife. And you realize, you know, that the physicists got their tunnel after all, racing the speed of light. It just happens to be in the Midwest instead of Texas, and it happens that the data that they're crunching is from a parallel universe and not our own. You know, and so that 825-mile trench is done, but that's just Chicago and New York. And this is a story really, like all stories, about manifest destiny, about looking for another frontier. And there are always more frontiers, and you need dynamite and rock saws to get there, you know, if an algorithm is going to close the deal 3 milliseconds faster. But there's plenty of space left to go, right? So this is theoretical. But important. This is two MIT mathematicians who have calculated planetary scale computing architectures for electronic trading. This is a whole bunch of really, really fancy stuff about like light cones and quantum entanglement and things that I don't get at all. But I understand this part, which is easy to understand, which is the red parts there are where the people are, where the markets got built in the first place. And that if you really want to run algorithms effectively, optimally, in the market, you're going to have to locate your servers where those blue dots are in order to minimize the time that it takes for the information to travel. And the thing that you'll notice, looking at this just casually, is that an awful lot of those blue dots are in the middle of the ocean. And I don't see that as a problem necessarily, because I think that we can solve that like we've solved everything else. We'll build bubbles or platforms, and we'll figure out how to sort of part the water for that. That doesn't seem that ambitious, because it's a super bright future if you're an algorithm. But it's not the money part that's amazing about all this, right? It's what the money is motivating. Right? The idea that we are terraforming, we're actually terraforming the Earth with this kind of algorithmic efficiency. And in this light, if you return back to Michael Najjar's photographs of the mountains shaped by the Dow Jones, you realized that it's not a metaphor at all, that it's prophecy, right? That Core War was no allegory, right? That Michael Najjar is not metaphor, that all of this, they're just playful fucking rehearsals for everything that we are already doing. Right, for all of the tectonic effects of the math that we've made, right? And this is the bottom line, right, is that the landscape has always been shaped by nature and by humans, and now it's sort of shaped by this third coevolutionary force, which is the algorithm. And we will understand those as nature, because in a way, they are. Thanks. So,
stories without authors.
Stories with.
We can just go home now. We don't need to listen to Bruce. I'm going to introduce Bruce with just a little something that I've just dialed up on my pocket computing device. There's lots of these things. I figure hundreds, maybe thousands, all different kinds, and everyone as stupid as dirt, or else would be dead and disassembled 100 times already. Pete stared at the dissected robots, a cooling mass of nerve netting, batteries, veiny armor plates, and gelatin. Why do they look so crazy? Because they grew up all by themselves. No one ever designed them. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a short story called Tackler-McCann by Bruce Sterling. This is Bruce Sterling.
Right, the author without a story. So yeah, I'm the obligatory literary guy at the gig, so I've got no slides. I'm just going to tell a thrilling wonder personal anecdote that happened to me actually when I was thinking about showing up here, because I've seen the other two thrilling wonder venues and I wasn't there, but I was keenly aware that they're full of FX guys and landscape futurists, and I'm quite the fan, and Cory Doctorow says hi, and William Gibson's got the Berg lab coat, and so I was keen to think, what kind of thrilling wonder am I going to bring to the table here? So I was looking over my email and trying to figure out if I could manage to travel in from Turin, which is where I happen to be staying right now, and I was making some scrambled eggs and bangers for breakfast. Sausage, went out and bought some sausage, so I'm slicing up my sausage, I'm cooking it and thinking about the wonderment. And then I realized there was an odd smell in the room. It's there's a horse in here. It was this smell of a wet horse. And then I realized it's horse sausage. Because, I went to the slow food grocery in Turin, and, I'm not picky. I just tend to pick them out by the shape. And I bought this particularly elaborate Piedmontese sausage, and it was horse. It was an equine sausage. So, I was startled by the smell of this sausage, and I thought, this is the most quotidian experience you're supposed to be able to have. I mean, you're cooking sausage for breakfast. I mean, what could be less gosh wow? And then it occurred to me, okay, well, what's the most thrilling and wonderful possible sausage? I mean, how could you really jazz it up, get some kind of really high thrilling wonderment out of a thing this every day? And if you're in the science fiction business as I am, there's certain things you can deploy. Okay, it's an artificially intelligent sausage, it's a nanocarbon sausage, the sausage time travels, the sausage went to Mars, and there are certain things that I think really do have thrilling wonder, because I'm not a cynic about the subject. I mean, I think it's a real part of experience. There are things like the size of the cosmos and the age of the Earth. And these are things that I think would cause wonderment in basically any cognitive organism. A hylozoic amoeba would be kind of amazed by that. An intelligent algorithm that had girdled the planet for its own purposes. If it knew how old the universe was, it would feel a sense of some kind of disturbance, or else it would just be kind of a wind-up tinker toy. And all the rest of it, all the rest of the thrilling wonder is basically socially constructed. Or it's got something to do with our bodies, thrills, explosions, fires, fights, high-speed chases, your basic FX. These are thrilling, but they don't really provoke any wonder of the kind I'm talking about. They're just metabolic, and they work in any genre. They don't have anything really to do with the spearhead of cognition, like my sausage. Okay, I can have an exploding sausage on fire with two guys fighting over it, and that's thrilling, right? I mean, the sausage is on fire and there's flames and guys and there's punching. Okay, that's not really going where I want to go. So, what is the most thrilling and wondrous? Horse sausage here in our actual disappointing reality. And being a novelist, I'm going to draw a verbal portrait of this thing. Okay, you know what a Przhevalsky's horse is? Przhevalsky's horse, very rare form of horse. They're not even related to actual horses. They're more like onagers or mules. They don't have the same chromosome count as other horses, but they're just sort of existent on the earth. I mean, they were discovered by a Polish explorer named Przewalski in Central Asia, and there were just a few of them left. I mean, they're the relic horse, you know, kind of an Eohippus. And they were almost all dead, but Przewalski managed to like grab a few, and there have been a few kept around, but no wild herds, because they just, you know, they're vulnerable. They're small, kind of dwarfy. You can't ride them. They're not real grown-up horses. I mean, they're called a horse. They're another kind of animal. I mean, they look like horses. And the biggest herd of Przewalski's horses is in Chernobyl. Because, you know, there's like this huge involuntary park in Chernobyl. It's as big as, you know, some small European countries. And people realized that, okay, like this thing blew up and it's like saturated everything around it. And for generations, nobody's going to be able to dwell here, at least not legally. So what are we going to do with this thing? Brilliant notion. You know, we're going to like round up some Przewalski's horses and just let them run around on the grassy plains of Chernobyl, you know, trampling through the buildings, whatever it is they want to do. You know, a fantastic notion. You know, and the horses took to it. They really, you know, they dug it. I mean, there's like, they're wildlife, and there's like no people around, and there's like no other horses, and they've got their niche there. So they were multiplying until recently. And then the fans of the Przewalski's horse herd, who periodically go out to keep track of them, notice that a few are missing, and they're like, okay, what is it? Is it equine distemper? You know, something must have happened to them. Poachers. Poachers are preying on the Przewalski horses in Chernobyl. This vast involuntary park, this damned and gloomy, gothic, high-tech, radioactive netherworld, somebody's eating the horses. Not private taxidermists. You know, nobody's like making horsehide couches out of them. You know, and they're not thrilling wonder supervillain bad guys. I can pretty well tell you who they are. I'm almost certain they're bored Ukrainian teenagers. Male teenagers. And they're like sitting out at the outside of the exclusion zone, and it's like, so, you know, have you seen a job lately, Yuri? You know? No, Leonid, I really haven't, you know? I mean, we don't have advanced degrees. We've already had a Twitter revolution here in the Ukraine. We had the Orange Revolution. We had like, you know, hip dudes with the handhelds. We went out, we stood in the public squares, froze, shouted the government down, brought in a new government. They just did the same thing the other guys did. What are we going to do with ourselves today? Well, you know, let's get in Granddad's pickup and take some rifles out into the zone again. You know, it's not a good thing to do. We know it's kind of bad. The cops don't approve, but, you know, at least we can feed the family. So they go out there and they're looking around for pretty much anything they can bag. You know, and along comes one of these little horses. It's like, oh yeah, that's like one of them, man. Pick it off, you know, hit it in the head. Pow, you know, it goes down, so they like rumble over quickly, you know, or their choppers. And no, it's like, grab him, you know, the two of them are there. Maybe they've got some levers or whatever. There's some muscling the thing up into the back of the pickup. And then they drive off with it. Okay, so they've killed the Przewalski's horse. What are they going to do with it? Well, you know, they're going to eat it, but they're going to sell it because they need money more than they need food. And what can you do with a dead horse? Okay, a small dwarfy one that's kind of weird. You can't really sell like big pieces of it, like the leg or the chops. You really need to render it. You know, you need to make it sort of unrecognizable. And in fact, you don't even want people to know it's horse. And you certainly don't want them to know it's from the Chernobyl exclusion zone, because basically the sucker glows in the dark. I mean, these animals are accumulating radioactive material in their flesh as they're grazing on this, you know, radioactive soaked stuff. So, you know, there they are. It's like, okay, we got to render it now. It's like, oh, well, that's not you and me, it's this other guy. So they pass it around to this other guy, and he's like running the offshore kind of, you know, handheld, you know. Well, I didn't used to be a butcher, but, you know, I just like tried for a while, and after a while I got pretty good at it, you know. So he's chewing the thing up. Okay, then it goes into the food distribution chain. Where is that sausage going to go, plausibly speaking? I mean, maybe Belarus. Because Belarus is like the last Stalinist outlaw state, which sort of means that everybody breaks the law and there's just selective repression. So, you know, and it's close. But economically speaking, the answer is almost certainly Moscow, because it's the center of distribution, especially for any black market activity and any Ukrainian black market activity. You're going to want to offshore it. If it goes offshore, it's going to go to Moscow. So who's eating the sausage? Well, there's a guy sitting in Moscow, probably looks pretty much like the guy in Tarkovsky's film Stalker. You know, rugged, older guy, you know, got his collar up. He's in an unlit, cold water apartment, you know, and in comes the sausage. And he's like slicing it up, you know, and it smells a little odd, you know. Smells a little odd like horse sausage, but, you know, he's not picky because he just, you know, he needed the sausage and he's eating it. He's munching that horse sausage that glows in the dark. The weirdest sausage on earth. The weirdest sausage on earth. If he knew how to look, which he doesn't. He doesn't have means, motive, opportunity, or the desire to figure out where his sausage came from. He's just plain eating it. Now, that's a very thrilling wonder story. I mean, it's very building blog, right? It's very boing boing. I read them. You know, it's got the classic Gothic high-tech sensibility that our time really likes. It's just kind of a cool, you know, forwardable kind of internet story. You know, it's not going to go anywhere. It would take some celebrity thing to push it. Like if you learned that Steve Jobs had once visited the Ukraine and he'd tired of his vegetarian diet and he'd eaten a bunch of sausage. You know, not wanting anybody to know. You know, I have Clary, you don't eat apples. You know, I'm a vegetarian. But wait, here in the Ukraine, they'll like feed me all this stuff. And now he's dying of pancreatic cancer horribly later. Because he did die for some reason, you know. Quite likely something he ate. Some kind of quack hippie, you know. Well, you know, you look at what happened to the guy. Okay, now that would make that story explode. It's like Steve Jobs killed by radioactive Chernobyl horse sausage. You know, if that were the case, it would be a Titanic story. It would be like a dominant cultural narrative, you know. It'd be like the last stories out of the Titanic. Okay, that's not actually gonna happen. Did I eat one myself? You know, was that horse sausage actually a Chernobyl sausage that somehow got passed into the slow food chain? You know, maybe it's not really probable. Maybe it didn't. So, you know, what is this doing to us? Well, you know, this is a dark cyberpunk parable of a world with a very conflicted attitude toward thrilling wonder. Because we really like it, and the people in this room are super good at it. You can match anybody on the planet. I mean, you've got seers of thrilling wonder in this room, visionaries. But that's not the dominant narrative of our time. I mean, our dominant narratives for the past, 12 years, first terror war, and then money panic, and now giant ripoff. Those are our kind of narratives, you know, and that's what you see every day in the newspaper, and that's kind of what we're fed, and we're like way into that. What is this about? I mean, here we are gathered under the kindly shelter of the faltering architecture biz. I love them. You know, and we're like a little speculative culture, you know, it's amazing, you know, how we can follow this exceedingly variegated series of things from all different kinds of disciplines, and nobody's missing a beat. I mean, it's like supposedly amazing, but nobody's really all that amazed. They're just kind of, you know, writing stuff down. They're like following. It's like, I get the pitch. Algorithms are taking over the earth. You know, like, I'm fine with that. You know, great. Bring on the next one. You know, but the world outside these walls is like a giant guy eating the radioactive horse sausage without knowing it. You know, because that's the condition to which the world is reduced by these events. And is that thrilling or wondrous? You know, is that a thrilling and wondrous situation that, you know, real life outside the FX biz, is that weird? You know, is it wondrous or not wondrous, or is it somehow both at once, like some kind of figure ground illusion? It's like a point of, you know, a socially constructed point of view thing where you can just like whip them from one to the other, like William Blake, you know, who famously said there's infinity in a grain of sand. Okay, why did he say that? You know, because he was a crazy visionary poet? Yeah, but also because it's the truth. I mean, there really is infinity in a grain of sand. I don't think anybody in this room would have any trouble demonstrating it. You can come up with like a PowerPoint pitch. This is my grain of sand. It's like, look, we can like drill down to it. Okay, any one of us could know that happens. If somebody gives you a bucket of sand, nobody ever says thank you for a billion infinities. If we really knew what we were doing, we'd be doing something about that, right? I mean, not just the amazement, the thrill, the wonder, the user base, We would be able to do it in a way that like burned with a hard gem-like flame. Whatever next. Thank you. So, Kevin, I'm keen to do the Waxahachie thing, because I've been to Waxahachie.
So that's a real place.
Yeah, I'm from Texas, so, I went there. And in fact, I went to the public hearings when they were shutting the thing down. And it really is a place to conjure with, I was sent around the world by Wired once for this story called Spirit of Mega, which was all about the biggest, most thrilling, and most wondrous architectural projects in the world. And I insisted that one of them should be the collider, the superconducting supercollider, because, with a figure ground thing, you had to have one that was a spectacular and utter failure, a kind of anti-Eiffel Tower. And, it's a super interesting area. They never did build the entire loop, by the way. They built 16 miles of it and then stopped drilling.
What do you think is in there now?
They actually covered, very carefully shot through all the plugs with concrete so that nobody could get into them. So there's a 16-mile arc of tunnel, which is still open, and about as big as this room. And it's just like one solid piece, and it'll be discovered someday. I mean, some guy with an algorithm is going to be like, "What's this echo in the ground?"
And they'll be like, "It's probably a super collider." And you're gonna
No, they're going to think it's some kind of pharaoh's tomb from the long-lost industrial age, and they're going to bend every effort to go in there and dig it up, and they're going to find somebody abandoned some newspapers and floppy disks in there at the last minute. Whatever, but
ET cartridges.
It really is. It's a colossal thing. I mean, it's an element to conjure with, that thing, and it's because it was buried by physicists and their supporters, and it's also because of the Ware Guild involved. I mean, the reason they got that money is not because of ultimate particle, God particle, Leon Lederman stuff. It's a payoff to not blow up the planet.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is a funny thing. I mean, it does conjure up the image of physicists as sort of like dangerous elements on their own, that these things get built to sort of cluster them around.
Well, Trinity is an ultimate thrilling wonder moment. Like, goes off at 5 a.m. and nothing like this has ever happened before or since. And like you could see popular culture like pivot on a dime and just go with this narrative. I mean, that was like a super sci-fi gesture to make, and nobody who was there really got over it on some basic Oppenheimer level. They were all marked by that. Just don't do it that way anymore, except maybe in the finance biz.
Right.
Bruce Banner Goes to Wall Street. We are now going to interlocute you. You're already starting to do it. So that you each swallow each other's sausages.
I'd like to have that struck from the record, please.
Julian, when you were showing the picture of the famous Pan Am flight to the lunar station, and I was struck by the fact that it wasn't an infographic. It was a list of words, and there were some things which. There are some sort of cultural forms which just weren't seen from those points of view, and that's sort of today we've been looking at sort of the way that cultural forms kind of spring from technology, and technology springs from cultural forms, and kind of even the most far-sighted among us kind of didn't have cell phones in some of their stories and those kinds of things. So it's kind of what's the dark matter in kind of the stuff that you're butting up against? I'll sort of open that to all of you. What are the things that you think you can't ever see from where you are?
The unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
It's scary to even think about. I guess maybe the same way that dark matter is scary to think about, but this idea that there's, we in a way, maybe almost like algorithmically, we want to track to the next thing, or we want to figure out what are the other opportunities for the equivalent of only seeing text in an information visualization and not realizing that there could be something else, just not knowing enough to know that. And I think it's finding those things that's most exciting for me. Those are the, in very modest ways, the thrilling wonder story is Wheels on Luggage. The fact that there was this time before people put wheels on luggage and we schlepped around 50-pound Samsonites is absolutely mind-blowing to me. Like that, just understanding that transformation. And even just it's just those small things, just the little accents. So the superconducting super collider is that, it's the big epic, and Trinity is the big epic story that things pivot on. But even those small little accents to the world, I think, are as relevant. And trying to find those, just those unexpected little, I'm just going to change that a little bit to the left, and all of a sudden everything changes, and we can't imagine how the world existed without it.
Now, what I really see in those unknown unknowns is a kind of reason to get out of bed in the morning. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, they represent a kind of Václav Havel-style hope, of salvation, like a reason to get out when things seem darkest. It's like things can't seem that dark because you don't know all the determining factors. You can't really allow yourself to become that depressed because it's an act of intellectual arrogance. There's just stuff going on that's beyond our kin, and that's very vivifying to me. I must say, in looking back over my own life, the things in life that gave me the most joy and pleasure, the things that made me really happiest to be alive, are things I could never have predicted for myself ever. And that's what really brought me a sense of contentment, not things that like, oh, I've got this aced. I've like cynically got this figured out. That's sure to work out that way. Okay, when that happens, it's banal. It just, okay, fine. I'm not like, oh, wow, give me my Mr. Wizard hat. I mean, the thrill's gone for that. The thrill is really, is elsewhere. And it's in things I don't know.
Kevin? Well, the thing... there's this phrase that every American's using right now, which is, I have no dog in that hunt. And the hunt in question here for me is all this research that I've been doing into financial products and financial services, which I don't really have any investment in the conventional sense of investment. But I'm super fascinated by, because it is its own, they're abstractions of the world, and the thing that's interesting to me is the vector towards absolute abstraction, and what I give as a design assignment now to students at Cooper Union, what they did very well at, was so after mortgages, right? Like there was the idea that like it's not the home, right? It's the system of payments around the home. After you package those up and tranche those up into these, CDOs, collectivized debt obligations, whatever, and you pack those up so that it's impossible to actually even find the outline of a home in there, right? Like the idea that there's actually somebody living in it, cooking sausage or whatever, has been like completely removed out of it, and that they managed to build these weird ideas out of that, and then took us all into a story that we didn't even know that we were part of. And when that failed, because it always fails, because it always reaches the conclusion, there is in the end something concrete. Where do you go from there? And and I know where they're going from there, and it's so amazing. And I give it. So I do this thing with students where I outline exactly how the mortgage crisis was produced, and then say, so what would you, if you were gonna carve it up, if you were gonna carve something up now, what would you carve up? And I did this very recently, and one of them got it, which is life insurance, which is what's being carved up right now in the United States, which is that everyone's life insurance is being bought and sold and repackaged into these fucked up collateralized debt obligations, exactly like the mortgages were. And the difference is that it takes longer for humans to fail than a mortgage. So we won't see that in the 5-year cycle that we saw with mortgages. We'll see that in like what might be a 20 or 30-year cycle. What I'm interested in is then what is after that? What's after that? What is even further? What takes even longer to fail? Like what is the abstraction of the abstraction of the abstraction? And because there are all of these designers and physicists, et cetera, who are working on this problem in very real ways, like who are deeply, deeply incentivized to work on this problem. And the problem is one of abstraction. It's not actually production, it's abstraction. And I'm just fascinated by their methodology. I mean, it's just because in that there are all the stories that are sort of revealed underneath that. But so that to me is the greatest unknown is what happens after this next one.
So can we take some questions for these guys? Yes, we can. Excellent. Here you go.
So does knowledge make us cynical? I mean, you know, understanding that there's a little man behind your scientific experiment making the vacuum happen, understanding the origins of your sausage, understanding that actually behind the kind of the magic of the financial world is some selfish little algorithm. I mean, you know, are we just making ourselves unhappy by knowing things? Getting rid of the wonder and the thrill and the magic?
Well, I think from my perspective, revealing that is exceptional because it allows us to understand that we actually have control over the path that these things take. So knowing that there's actually someone was typing on a keyboard in a very kind of plain way to construct the algorithm is incredibly liberating because at some point you can track back and know that it didn't just come from a space spore, that we actually are in charge of that bit. And so I think the point there is to reveal as much of that as possible, not so that there'll be some kind of fantastic Marxist upturning of the world because people all of a sudden realize the means of production, those kinds of things, but knowing that it is by our hand that these things occur.
Well, you know, I'm very attracted by Eastern European cultures and spent a lot of time in that society. And the first time I went to Russia, I was like interviewing a lot of Russians, and I'm like, so, you know, what seems to be the problem here? And, you know, and I was, you know, just, you know, because they like to complain, and you realize that they're gonna, you know, they're a culture of lamentation, and they're, you know, actually in Serbia, where I spent a lot of the time, a very common popular greeting is, "What ails ya?" It's true, I swear to God. But, you know, the thing that struck me was that all my correspondents, these people I was interviewing, were exceedingly knowledgeable. I mean, they really had elaborate, almost theological ideas of what it was, at what time their society had gone off the rails, but no two of them agreed on anything. So they were super knowledgeable and, you know, very well educated and very hip. And, you know, and sort of masters of dark esoteric knowledge, but their cynicism had made them incompetent, so that you couldn't like put 7 of them into 2 cabs. You know, they would have like fantastic, explosive arguments about who's supposed to go when under what's under. But you did this back in 1975. You know, there are long grievance narratives and. So, you know, I learned to shy away from that kind of all-knowing cynicism because it's like a short pathway to just foolishness, you know, and it can't even be called knowledge. You know, what it is a kind of intellectual arrogance. And, you know, the upshot is that you drink.
One at the, oh, they're always at the back. Right. This is slightly ill-formed, but it sort of ties into that as well. It strikes me that that sort of cynicism or that sort of processing is a very adult reaction. Out of the three examples Kevin chose, you know, chess and Monopoly have expert level play, but I can teach them to an 8-year-old. I can't teach an 8-year-old Core War. I can't say to them, this is the way you understand the world. And interestingly, the Haynes manual as a reaction is such an adult reaction to the enterprise. I want to know how it works. How do I find that out? I go to the store and I buy a Haynes manual. And I was wondering, with a slightly precocious hat on, how do we explain this to kids? What's the actual simple distillation of this? Because right now, I'm seeing a really complex, adult, cynical, deep view of the future, but I don't know how to make the toy that will teach you about this. I don't know how to embed this in education. I'm curious as to the way you teach this modern world to children and through education.
There's this thing called video games that are pretty good at that. That's what video games do, right? I mean, video games are they're living systems that many children engage with every day and are working with systems of far greater complexity than I think kids have ever done, and arguably take all of that for granted in a positive way. It's like the greatest procedural complexity that I had as an 8-year-old was 2 6-sided dice, or I guess 52 cards, right? And the idea of being an 8-year-old with the tools in front of us is incredible. And I don't actually agree that any of this is necessarily cynical at all. I may sound cynical, but I'm not. I mean, I think that the alternative to that sort of adult reaction of like actually wanting to grasp and understand the system that is underneath all of it, the alternative to that hasn't produced enormous happiness either. And I see it. I've been spending time with just talking to some of the people who are at Occupy Wall Street, and it's like they don't even know what do you put on your sign? Like, what do you protest? How do you how do you express it? And they literally don't have the vocabulary. Many of them. They literally don't have vocabulary, and I don't think that having the vocabulary is what produces the cynicism. I think it's just the consequences of the things that we're talking about. But being able to approach them and understand them and find the magic that is actually sort of embedded inside them, the magic is still amazing to me, and I don't mean to take anything away from that.
No, I hate seeing kids picked on because of adult troubles. And I think it's very typical of a multidisciplinary meeting. They usually resolve on, let's teach the kids everything we ourselves don't understand. But my feeling is like the best favor you can do to a child is, instead of coming up with some kind of perfect curriculum, you need to set them an example as an engaged adult. Like, okay, this thing is my fault. I'm accepting responsibility for this. Oh, even though this bad thing happened, I'm going to do this other thing. These things happen in life. You teach them how to live, and they understand that better than they do some imaginary notion that you're going to somehow tell them what their own world is like when they're going to be your age. Because even with the best intentions, you can't really prepare them for that. I mean, even assuming they have jobs, they're not going to have the same jobs you had or the same skill set you had. So, why burden them with that? And it's better to just live, and live in daylight and take them seriously as moral observers.
There will be wheels on luggage. You can't tell them that. Questions on this side? I got it, Matt. Okay, good.
It's a question about the algorithms again, to Kevin. So what seems to be very scary about the algorithms is not the algorithm itself, but the fact that how it interacts with the humans. So one could say, if the algorithm would interact with the robots or machines, and the machines they would blow up the mountains and make the way and so on, I wouldn't be very scared of the algorithm then, because clearly no one wants these kind of machines and they would be stopped. But it's the very fact that humans interact, and it's the humans that blow up the mountains, that makes the algorithm even more effective, isn't it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, for me, the thing for me, there's two things that make them scary. And to your point, it's not the algorithm itself. It's like, it's math, right? Whatever. But one thing is the idea that there are algorithms that are not in analytic roles, but in executive roles. So the algorithms that are pricing books on Amazon are arguably analytic, right? Like they're looking for a pattern in book prices and they're trying to set a price based on it. But in the end, it's actually, there's a human who executes, who says, yes, that book is worth it to me or not. But when you start to see things like the flash crash, where the same stock is being priced at 1 penny at, this many ticks past the second and $99,999.99 the next tick, right? And actually trading, right? Like actually trading, at enormous volume on that. It's the idea that there is no human oversight, right? The idea that there is no babysitter, right? There's nobody who says like, yeah, okay, it's a good idea, right? In fact, the only button is stop, right? Like there are no other buttons, right? That's my problem with it, right? Like my problem with it is that it, there's this whole idea that that they're getting really, really smart and we're ignoring that. And it's like, the problem is that they're dumb and that we're ignoring that. The problem is that they will never have a rational approach in the sense that we can reason. They'll never have a reasoned approach in the sense that humans reason, and we're treating them like they do, right? We're treating them as if they reason the way we do, and of course they don't, because 99% of the time it appears the same. 99% of the time Watson will beat all the other players on Jeopardy, right? But it's that we don't have because it can do that, it feels intelligent to us, and it's not at all. And I think that's the danger of it.
I mean, I'm intrigued by when you finished you said that we need to understand the algorithm as nature, because the algorithm already is, in a way. It made me think of, last year we spent time in Australia, and this is a geology, a landscape, the very formation of which is the subject of story and myth. The Dreamtime stories of the Aboriginal Australians are actually embedded in the formation of the ground. But cut out of this landscape is this extraordinary mining terrain, a terrain that's kind of an inevitable consequence of our iPhone, the gold on the circuit board that conducts better than any other mineral. What's amazing in terms of your conversation about algorithms is that the things that give those holes in the ground shape, unlike the myth of the rainbow serpent that slid through making valleys and rivers, the things that give these mines shape is the fluctuations of the stock market. The gold price going up and down means that the way that they refine the gold, it becomes more effective to dig a bigger hole and mine lower concentrations if the gold price is high. If the gold price is low, the hole is smaller. So you have real-time mining trucks and diggers linked to the stock market that changes in real time the shape of this hole in the ground. So you have this condition where the culture that you're talking about, the culture of algorithms, is actually shaping a geology, cut out of which you have this other kind of cultural landscape, running through it. So, I mean, if we know what the world looks like where algorithms shape it, it's the world around us now, what does this world look like when we do start to understand the algorithm as nature? When we have a new cultural relationship to these holes in the ground that aren't formed by a rainbow serpent, that we don't understand in myth in the way that we typically relate to nature historically, but we understand it in a new way. I mean, what does that world start to look like? Is that world still fearful for you? Or is it about the cognitive kind of imagining of the algorithm and us kind of coming to terms with that makes us feel somehow, makes you feel content, I suppose, with your discovery?
I'm not sure that it necessarily looks that different. I mean, it's case by case. If you go to Mahwah, New Jersey, which is basically just, it would take too long to explain. There are points on the Earth that have been transformed, where they were substantively different 10 years ago, physically, even tectonically, there's stuff there that wasn't around before this. But I think that mostly it's just sort of, it's all around us the way all these other systems are all around us that we're also completely unaware of. That it's like we're no more aware of the ways that, I talk to the people who work in the building at 60 Hudson Street, they have no idea what's in that building, right? But that will be the case for all buildings anywhere on the Earth, no matter what they're doing. And I think that the idea, it's like, the fact that everything happened on Wall Street, it's because that's where the ships came in, bringing goods across the Atlantic. The fact that that was also opaque was fine. I don't know that it's this is what basically all we're doing here is sort of mining the stories of why things are the way they are, but that doesn't necessarily render them with a specific value relative to the people who are experiencing that. I don't know. It's not a very good answer to your question.
Well, I can't answer that question any better, but I think there's a human impulse to try and grab as much guilt as possible out of a situation like this. So, I would pose you like a thought experiment. Let's just say that there's an algorithm that actually looks like a moral actor. Let's say we crossbreed Google with Siri. So now Google can talk. So, you get online and so Google, what's happening? I am Google. Okay. At that point, you're going to see a whole lot of sudden, a shifting of blame, because the thing has got some kind of human face and can be interrogated and can be, brought into a world of moral activity. But algorithmically, it wouldn't necessarily be doing anything more than it was, and might not even pass a Turing test. I don't think Siri passes a Turing test. I mean, Siri just responds to queries by performing a stochastic algorithmic sifting of all the text that's already there, right? But, we don't want to either sort of blame the algorithms or we want to grab things away from them and somehow make ourselves important. And if we were in a world where we were actually minor players, where, there was a third nature and we were something like, I don't know, fungi, and, in the scheme of things, we'd still go on, we'd still have like thrilling wonder meetings and, there'd be divorces and gunshots and, whatever it was. I mean, we behaved like other species did, and I would point out that if nature is somehow an algorithm, I mean, that works backwards. Algorithms could be natural, nature could be algorithmic, and everybody has a kind of Mother Nature Edenic myth that nature never screws up. But there have been 5 major extinctions, that we know of on the planet, or just something went bust, and that wasn't us or our algorithms, and they didn't just kind of go bust. They went bust for like dozens of millions of years at a time. I mean, if that's what nature is, and that's what an algorithm is, then we ought to be figuring that out in our attitudes toward it. It's not like it's perfect and we somehow messed up. It's not perfect. I mean, there was the flash crash of 245 million BC.
Right, but they're working on that. Like
kind of over.
Do we have any other questions on the floor that Matt can grab?
No? Everybody's worn out by the thrill and the wonder. Philip is shaking his head. Do you have a question, Philip?
No, I don't have a question.
Oh.
Just a quick comment to offer back to this image of the bleak curmudgeons eating horse sausage and trading cynicisms. You gave us a couple of different pictures of William Blake, and perhaps it's an offering back to think of, on one hand, him being an absolute bastard, a curmudgeon, I mean, a really horrifically nasty, impatient person, while oscillating to his vision of angels inhabiting every single leaf of every tree in his neighborhood.
Yeah, well, he's a poet. They're like that, you know. You know, it's like the quarrels at the academic parking lot when there's less and less. I mean, I'm the literary guy, you know. I'm a literary guy. Every once in a while, I hang out with poets, and I'm always amazed at how much bitterness they have for one another. You would think that they would be full of solidarity. And I was like, well, gee, a couple of centuries ago, we could write national anthems and the earth would quake. You know, everybody would bow the knee when a poet comes in. But they're just like little backstabbing dudes. You know, it's like that's alarming how little fellow feeling poets have for one another. Rock stars are icons of solidarity compared to poets. I'll never understand it. And I swear it's true. It's a thrilling wonder how little they can manage.
I think we're all worn out, man. But I just want to say, let's wrap it up there. And I guess it's all that's left to be said is really an amazing thank you to what is just still a jaw-dropping collection of people. I'm still amazed that we're able to get everyone in the room together. So that's really, really fantastic. So thanks all for giving up your time and coming in. It really was amazing. Thanks so much for And thanks to before you all went off, and thanks to Matt Jones, who really is a trooper. Every time I seem to get him into this building, I force him to stand in one room for 9 hours, not feed him anything or give him anything to drink whatsoever. So one more, more horse sausage. For the masochists amongst you, New York is online at the moment, so you can log on, and if you just need more thrilling wonders, I think they're in typical building block bowerbird fashion. He's mining the depths of astrobiology right now. So please check in with that. One more thing, the live feed, like all the things you've seen today, with the exception of Andy Lockley that's probably being chased down the street by an angry Christopher Nolan, will be online and archived on thrillingwonderstories.co.uk in a couple of weeks before we probably when we get around to doing it. But you should be able to get on there, and you actually already now you can get on and check out Thrilling Wonder Stories 2 and 1 is already up there. But thanks again to all the speakers and to Matt, and thanks to you guys as well for coming and sticking it out.
And well done, Liam.
Thanks a lot, guys. See you next year.
Okay, that was that. A moment in time from 2011 in London when Kevin, Matt, and Liam have sort of slipped away from the once integrated network of Shapers of Worlds. It's only His Eminence Bruce who answers my emails. Such is the way time shapes relationships. Until the next broadcast, this has been a special broadcast from the Near Future Laboratory. See you soon. I'm Julian, and I'm out.